Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very exciting, I don't know if I want to say barbaric, I don't know, but definitely exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. So glad on this episode to be talking with author, creator Jim Zub. Jim, thank you
Hey,
for jumping in.
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's very nice to meet you.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you as well. I will mention just a few titles,
Sure.
the most recent of which is not Street Fighter, but Street Fighter is back there.
Yeah.
It is one of your earlier titles. You've also created
Mhm.
in the worlds of the Avengers, the Thunderbolts, and most recently, the world's most famous, arguably most famous barbarian, and that is
Yes.
Conan. Yeah.
Yeah. Conan the Barbarian, Dungeons and Dragons. I've
hmm
done some Rick and Morty,
hmm
Black Panther, Iron Man, a little bit of Batman, all kinds of lots and lots of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a joy. And then my own original creator-owned books as well, which I'm really, really proud of. And none of this stuff would have happened without, like, if I hadn't done my own original works to sort of establish myself in comics and get my stuff out there, none of the other projects would have come about. So yeah.
Wonderful journey. And you were mentioning that there's an entire shelf behind you that
Yeah.
is it contains your work. So there's no way
Yeah.
I could mention them all, but that's very
No.
impressive.
Yeah, it's crazy. So it's like this whole bookshelf from floor to, ceiling, I guess on camera there, is
Yeah.
all my books, which is really weird. The first time you sort of start filling up a shelf and you're like, man, I have half a shelf worth of books, or oh man, this is so crazy. And
hmm
then between foreign editions and reprints and omnibuses and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it depends on how you measure it, because things get, you do single issues and then you do trade paperbacks and all that kind of stuff. I've arguably done somewhere around 70 graphic novels. I've written over
Very
8,000
nice.
pages of comics over the last bunch of years. Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been a really cool journey, and I'm really, really proud of the work, and still doing it. Working on some of my favorite things, so it's a joy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm curious as you reflect on that shelf, what comics has allowed you to do creatively that maybe you wouldn't necessarily get to do in another medium.
Right. I mean, the type of collaboration you get to do in comics is it's my preferred medium. Obviously, it's what I love to do. I love working with the art team. I've got a background in art, so I started in art and animation as an artist, and I still teach at an art college here in Toronto. And that process of building both the visuals and the words with someone, with the team, putting together a vision for it, putting together those pages, and the interplay of words and pictures is so unique and so potent, and I still love it to pieces. I love that process, and so you get that kind of visual bang that some other mediums have, but we can do it with a much tighter knit kind of crew. It's almost
hmm
like every one of these little productions is a little indie film crew, and we're guerrilla filmmaking on the page. Like, it feels like every single time you get this really tight knit group. And when it works, when you've got the right artist, and the right colorist and the right letterer, and the words are all kind of singing together, it's amazing how much kind of harmony can kind of happen on the page, and how you can enhance each other's work. In animation, we would call it plussing, that at
hmm
each stage of development and design and storyboarding and animation and post-production and editing and sound and all that stuff, you're adding more, you're making it better, you're making it clearer. And with comics, it's like a really tight-knit version of that, and it's something that I really, really enjoy about the medium. And when you're working with people that inspire you, you don't want to fail them, you want to step up and deliver your best every single time.
Yeah,
So
I love what you said there about guerrilla filmmaking on the page too. Love
yeah,
that.
yeah. That's what's so great about it. It's a really small, tight-knit crew. Even some of the comic kind of event stuff I've done, when you get right down to it, you're talking about usually, less than 10 people, sometimes as little as two or three, working on a particular project together. And
hmm
so it's tight-knit. You get to know each other. You get to figure out what each other's strengths are, and what you're capable of, and how to maximize the kind of impact of that on every page and in every story as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned some creator-owned work that you've done, and I'm curious
Mhm.
about the titles, the types of stories that you're really drawn to
Sure.
tell.
I'm
Mhm.
really known for sword and sorcery writing now, and all of that stems from a book that I did in 2010. But the first book I ever did was a web comic. This is like something that I serialized online. I was working in the animation industry at the time, and it was like a hobby for me in the evenings. I would post usually 3 pages a week. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would post up a new page of this little story called The Makeshift Miracle, and
Mhm.
it was this surreal kind of coming of age story. A lot of the web comics at the time were very much in this kind of comic strip sort of comedy mold. Some of them would do more kind of slice of life stuff, but it was always about like very much in that newspaper gag strip kind of format. Like there was always a punchline and thing like that. And I was sort of doing a more dramatic story that I was trying to tell, and I had a distinct ending in mind, and that I was building towards. And so that was a really great way for me to learn about how the medium worked,
Mhm.
and kind of at the time, kind of shortcut around all the hassles and the frustrations of trying to get a publisher or figure out how book publishing worked. I could just have my own website and post up pages, and people could find it.
Mhm.
At first I was just posting them hoping that friends and family would read it, and then eventually it sort of spread, bit by bit, and people were sharing it around, and you start to meet other people in the, I guess at the time, the web comics kind of industry, if you wanted to call it that. None of us were really making money, and we didn't know what we were doing, but we were kind of scrappy and do it yourselfing our way through the industry,
Mhm.
and bit by bit learning more and more about how comics worked and business and conventions and all that kind of stuff. And eventually I would go on to work at an art studio called Udon. They do all sorts of publishing and things
Mhm.
now, but they've made a
Mhm.
bunch of comics over the years, including the Street Fighter stuff, like you mentioned earlier. I learned a ton through that studio how to do, professional art illustration, working with clients on comic books and advertising art and video game concept art and movie concept art, all sorts of amazing stuff like that. And eventually got some really good grounding in that kind of experience, and would carry that forward to getting back to my own original concepts. So I worked with an amazing artist named Chris Stevens and another artist named Edwin Huang, a colorist named Misty Coates, and our amazing intrepid letterer Marshall Dillon, and we made a action comedy fantasy book called Skull Kickers, and that
Mhm.
launched in 2010. And that changed my life because it kind of put me on the map with people. Image Comics was going through this kind of cool renaissance of, the Walking Dead TV show was in development, and it was like, oh, indie comics and creator owned comics are kind of hot again. And we were putting out this really, in a market where there weren't a lot of fantasy books, we were putting out a fantasy book, and where there weren't a lot of humor books, we were doing this kind of, slapstick comedy kind of thing. And we
Mhm.
built up our own little fun readership, and people looked at me as a writer for the first time in a long time, that I wasn't just this guy working at this art studio or this guy at conventions. I was making stories, and I was working with, some amazing people. And that kind of got me on people's radar, like, oh, Jim tells good stories. Oh, Jim's organized. He's a good person to work with. And that would spin off. It took a little while. It always does. But that would spin off into other, opportunities to write on other people's stuff. Eventually, this comic called Pathfinder, based on the tabletop role playing game, I
Mhm.
would do a Red Sonja special. I would end up doing just all kinds of different things. I got to do my first sort of project over at DC Comics. And then as I was slowly building up those credits, I was doing more and more of my own original stuff as well. I worked with a good friend of mine, Stephen Cummings, and we made a book called Wayward, which was this kind of teen drama, um, supernatural story set in Tokyo. And
Mhm.
that one leveled me up again, got me on a lot more people's kind of radar, had a regular readership really build up for that book. And that was sort of the breakthrough. After 2014, I started to get pretty regular work, whether it was at Marvel or with companies like IDW, or, obviously I was doing more writing stuff at Udon, and just at that point, it was like, oh, this is a viable career. Like I can actually do this on a regular basis, and get to work on these really cool properties that I grew up with, or stuff that I've always wanted to kind of explore. Yeah.
Love the journey, love it, and that brings us to your current work with the Sumerian.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Yes.
curious about what that's been like to get to work on.
It's surreal in a lot of ways. I have been kind of intertwined with Conan stuff for so long. Obviously, grew up reading the Marvel comics and seeing the original Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Loved reading the original Robert E. Howard stories and in the short stories from the pulps. But that stuff is really kind of in my blood, and you could see that in things like Skull Kickers. Even though it was a comedy book, we definitely had kind of that fantasy ridiculous edge. It had Dungeons and Dragons in it. It had that Conan the Barbarian kind of feel to it.
Mhm.
And so one of my first professional gigs in the industry was actually recoloring some of the reprints for Conan for Dark Horse, which was a really fun kind of project. This is like 2003, like
Yeah.
before any of my writing credit stuff. So it was funny that one of my first published credits is as a colorist, and now I'm linked to, I'm writing the flagship book for Conan the Barbarian. uh I'm the only person currently who's written the character at 3 different publishers. So I wrote some Conan at Dark Horse,
Mhm.
not very much, but a little bit there. I've written the character at Marvel, and now I'm writing it, under this new imprint under Heroic Signatures, which is the actual rights holders of Conan the Barbarian, and it's being printed by Titan, which has been really, really cool. And so Conan's kind of been a part of my life for quite a while, but now this new publishing initiative we just launched in August.
Mhm.
The rights holders wanted to do their own kind of publishing. They didn't want to have any more kind of licensing deals. They wanted to control the sort of future and fate of the character. There have been Conan the Barbarian comics being published for 50 years now, and they
Mhm.
felt like they could chart their own path in a much more direct manner. And they liked the work that I did over at Marvel. They felt like I had a good voice for the Sumerian and his world, and had some really cool ideas. And so we put together this very ambitious publishing plan, and launched over the summer. And the response has been explosive. It's been
Mhm.
absolutely amazing. One of the biggest, one of the craziest projects I've ever been a part of. And the fan response has been unbelievable. Honestly, it's weird because, like I said, I've written other Conan stories before and the response was fine. People liked it.
Yeah.
But this new series, man, oh man, the teams that I get to work with artistically are phenomenal. Getting to work directly with the rights holders and build this thing out over a longer period has been just awesome.
Mhm.
We've got great support editorially. Our publisher is amazing. Our creative team is amazing. This artist Rob De La Torre, who I just
Mhm.
finished up the first arc with, and colorist Dean White, they have done an absolutely phenomenal job at kind of taking the best traits of the past, the kind of highlights of what made those comics such a big hit in the 70s, and brought it to the present with a lot of fidelity and a lot of intensity. And then
Mhm.
the second story arc that literally kicks off this week when we're recording it, that is being drawn by this amazing artist I've always wanted to work with. His name's Doug Braithwaite, and
Uh-huh.
our colorist Diego Rodriguez. And they're bringing, again, this really beautiful classic look that feels like the pulps, but like tuned up to 11. We get to do kind of this unfettered, unleashed version of Conan, which is distinctly R rated if this was a
Mhm.
movie, but
Mhm.
also very much in line with kind of the original source material, expanding upon that mythic structure and just really going to town with it. And the readership, both the long, fans of Conan that have been with the character for decades, or brand new people jumping on board because they've heard it's a good thing, they're really, really responding to it. And that is what is most, exciting for me, and most, um, yeah, just such a joy is to realize that we've been able to kind of capture this energy that people love about the character and bring them this version of the character that I feel like is timeless and really, really cool, and doesn't have to be something from the woeful past. It's like, no, this thing is vibrant and awesome and
Mhm.
well worth
Mhm.
following in the here and now. So yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll just tip off a wonderful setup in the first issue for that first arc,
Thank
and
you.
I believe it's Richard Starking's
Yes,
comic
so
craft.
Rich Starkings
Yeah.
is, I mean, he's an award-winning legend in the industry. I've never had a chance to work with him on a project before, and he is bringing this classic flair to all of our lettering, and making it feel again like it stepped out of the 70s, but the best kind of traits of it with the fidelity of printing and color that we can get here in the 2020s.
Hmm.
And Richard's awesome. He is like, so he has been associated with Conan lettering for God, since the Dark Horse run.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
he is such a big fan of the character. And I was actually a little bit intimidated to have him on the team because he's been such a legend in the industry. And man, that guy is so supportive and so kind and so gung ho. We've jumped on calls together, and he is just like a big kid. He is such an amazing guy. I had this incredible interaction with him at San Diego this year. We were doing our kind of pre-launch. We had early copies of the book at San Diego that people could buy. And I'd never met Richard in person. And we had just the most delightful conversation. He was just so supportive and complimentary of our team, and that feeling of a team that he feels like, we're just this really cool kind of creative family, with this really special character. Like you said, probably the most famous, arguably the most famous sword and sorcery character in the world.
Hmm.
I've said it before, but like the Superman of sword and sorcery, he is the template on which people have built the genre. He is the template. Whether or not you like or don't like Conan the Barbarian, a lot of your creative choices when it comes to sword and sorcery are either playing into some of those concepts, those stereotypes,
Hmm.
or being built to contrast against them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but you have to address it. It's like Tolkien. It's one of those intrinsic kind of elements that make up fantasy. The difference being that Tolkien, I feel like, they call it high fantasy. So you've
Hmm.
got this very colorful, very magical kind of world. You've got these big spanning, you know, like that magic is much more kind of at the heart of where this adventure comes from. And in the world of Conan, it's a much darker, low fantasy, if you want to call it that. It's like
Hmm.
survivalist, it's mysterious, it's strange. Magic is not something you can know, it's something that's going to destroy you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Conan doesn't need to have understand the grand movements of gods and demons and beasts. The world is sort of happening around him, and he has to survive at every step of it. And that's just feels so cool to me and feels so exciting. And being able to bring that to people and kind of go, look, this is what's so cool about this character, and we're going to give it to you every single month, and earn the cover price. Yeah.
Yeah. And it absolutely does. Absolutely.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I usually ask about creative directions moving forward, so I know we have the next part of the Conan run coming. You said this week.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. So each arc that we're putting together in the first year is 4 issues. So
mhm.
we've got three stories that we're telling in the first 12. And each one is linked together thematically. Once readers read issue 5, they're going to realize what the tethers are to the first arc. First arc is called Bound in Blackstone. And we're not just we're doing real classic ingredients of a Conan story. There's obviously a huge threat, and there's evil afoot, and he's got to fight this. I guess you could call it almost like a zombie army.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's new characters being introduced. We've got this hunter scout named Brissa, and the two of them have a bond as they're trying to figure out how they're going to defeat this, what they call the tribe of the lost, this Pict tribe that has been corrupted by some mysterious evil from who knows where. I know where, but you guys don't until you read the story. And above and beyond that, we're also trying to bring in these tethers and these cool ideas of this broader mythic structure. Robert E. Howard wrote, depending on how you measure it, there's fragments and things like that. There's basically 21 canon Conan stories
Mhm.
published at different times. Um, and then there's a series of he wrote over 300 pulp stories. Some of them are horror, some of them are westerns, some of them are mysteries, and all kinds of different stuff, noir tales and things like that. But a bunch of them have really interesting little carryovers. Sometimes he'll reuse a word or a symbol or a concept. Kull the Conqueror was first a prototype character who is the first Conan story was actually originally supposed to be a Kull story that ended up being changed and transformed before it got published. And then eventually, Robert E. Howard decided that Kull came from an earlier part of the same history that links to Conan's Hyborian Age. And
Mhm.
so this kind of broader world building, this mythic structure, has always kind of bubbled underneath the surface of a bunch of the Robert E. Howard stories. And when Roy Thomas was writing the comics in the 70s, his solution to it was to take almost every single Robert E. Howard story, and if it had anything even remotely, with a singular hero or any kind of fantasy or sword and sorcery element, just to make it a Conan story. Just file the serial numbers off and go, okay, that's this other kid's Bran McElmorn. Now it's a Conan story, or it's, this horror tale. Well, now it's a Conan story. And
Hmm.
what we're doing with the heroic signatures approach is we're saying, no, all those stories exist in their own time, but they're part of this broader kind of mythic universe, that these things all are linked together. And one of those is from for lack of a better term, like an eldritch horror story that Robert E. Howard put together called The Black Stone. And it's this cool, creepy, mysterious material that is able to contact some other realm or some eldritch gods or whatever may have you.
Hmm.
And we're using that now in the Conan tales, but rather than just taking the original Black Stone story and transposing it to the Hyborian Age, we're kind of building it up through Conan's history, or we're attaching him to these broader kind of pulp milieu elements. And that's been really fun. uh
Yeah.
not just trying to adapt what exists, but trying to extrapolate beyond it and to go, okay, this really cool pulp kind of mythos is here. What can we do to link these together more tightly, or how can we make this dramatically satisfying, and what kind of mysteries can we sprinkle into this story that we can pay off 5, 6, 10, 12 months down the road, so
Hmm.
that readers are engaged and excited in ways that they may not have been before. One of the difficulties when you have such well-known material is that, like, every single Conan story and almost every single iconic Robert E. Howard story has already been adapted in comics. And so I didn't just want to do, hey, here's the Tower of the Elephant for the fourth or fifth time,
Hmm.
in a
Hmm.
comic book form. It's an amazing story. I love that story. But how can we take that broader material and kind of do something else with it, or surprise you with those ingredients? The Tower of the Elephant still exists, and God in the Bowl still exists, and the Frost Giant's Daughter. Those stories are part of Conan's history, but that time in between, we can explore and we can do really cool things with it. And that's kind of been a challenge and a joy, because I'm not just trying to we're not being a cover band, we're not just
Right.
playing the hits. We're trying to make music that feels like your favorite kind of thing about the character and about the world, but still be able to surprise you from month to month and story to story.
Yeah. Well, very cool to hear about how you're pulling those threads together and making what works about the character just ring true in new ways. So I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Yeah, a great approach. And my final official question is, where can folks learn more?
Oh, I mean, that's really easy. Obviously, Titan Comics is our publisher, so you can go to Titan to find out all about the comic stuff and the Conan stuff. On my personal front, everything's at jimzub.com. So I just have a website I've had for a long, long time, and it is a blog archive of all my thoughts on what's going on. You can sign up for a newsletter I send out usually weekly with announcements of projects, tutorials and analysis of my work, articles that I'm really enjoying about fiction, about video games, about tabletop gaming, or the comic book industry. Sometimes recipes and things that I like to cook. You can keep track of all that stuff there. And then I've also got a series of over 40 free articles about what it's like working in comics, how to pitch your own stories to a publisher, how to find and work with an artist, what an editor does, what publishers are looking for and why. All the things that I wished I had known when I was getting started,
Mhm.
because I've got this teaching background. I tend to codify stuff. So as I learn something, I'm like, oh man, I got to put this down so that I better understand it. And now it's a free resource for anyone to sort of dig through and learn from it. And the vast majority of it is still very, very relevant to the industry as it is, and is pretty timeless in terms of how to organize your thoughts and structure it so that a publisher can get an idea of what your story is and where you're going with it.
Fantastic. Well, great resources to share. And I know you're a busy person. I appreciate your time. Did we miss anything that you want to make sure to mention before we close?
I've got other, projects on the go right now. I've got a brand new Dungeons and Dragons mini series called Fortune Finder that just started up, and I'm really excited about. I think that's all the stuff I can talk about right now for new projects. But if you go to my site, I've got a big archive of books that you can dig through, whether that is, my sword and sorcery stuff, or superheroes, or my creator owned books. And next year I'm going to have a pretty aggressive travel schedule, so I will be at a bunch of different conventions in North America and abroad. So again, if you're on my website, you'll see those announcements, and if you want to meet me or get books signed or stuff like that, it is an absolute pleasure to meet people on the road and to chat comics with them. I just did New York Comic Con, just a month and a half ago,
Mhm.
and getting to meet people who have been reading the Conan books and their excitement, it really does recharge my creative batteries and reminds me why I do this stuff. So it's a joy.
Awesome, awesome. Well, a joy to talk with you, and glad to have you back anytime, and looking forward to much more to come.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.